Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. It's January 11th, 2023. Thought I'd give you a little update on the peeler skiff build. So since my last video, I've been working on the transom, the two sides of the boat, and the bottom of the boat, getting those ready to stitch together along with the bulkheads so that I can get the boat assembled and start gluing it together. And so I'm doing as much prep work as I can before I put it together to each of the parts. I'm epoxying the ones that I can. So, because it's easier to do them on a flat surface than it is on the boat. So I probably already mentioned I glassed and epoxied the inside of the bottom of the boat. This is a flat bottom boat, so I got that done. And then I epoxied the two sides of the boat. And I thought I would try peel ply, which is this stuff here, release fabric. I've never used it before, probably because I didn't want to spend the money, but I've heard wonderful things about it. This stuff is $5 a yard, comes in 60-inch wide roll, and I bought it by the yard at a local store here. So with this, in theory, you take a bare piece of Okoume plywood, you roll on a nice, fairly thick coat of epoxy, nice and even, and then you lay this fabric on and you roll it out. And you actually use a paddle roller, which I'd never even heard of a paddle roller. This can also be used for rolling out glass, fiberglass that you fill with epoxy. It takes out the bubbles, and that actually worked really well. So anyway, you put the release fabric on top, you roll it out, get all the bubbles out, you let it sit overnight, and then you pull the release fabric off. Well, when I pulled the release fabric off, I had the imprint of creases on the epoxy. So then I went to my peel ply roll, and I looked at it, and it's like it did have creases in it. So I'm like, well, that's kind of stinks. So I actually called the store where I bought it. They said, we'll bring it back, we'll look at it. So I went up there a couple days ago. They looked at it. The guy pulled out a new roll. It still had creases in the new roll. So then he talked to the owner, and the owner said, well, you might have to iron out some of those creases. So anyway, make a long story short, I used the peel ply on the two sides of the boat. And when I pulled it off, it left creases, so I had to add a second coat of epoxy to it and then sand that down. I also ended up with some fish eyes in the epoxy, which are little places where the epoxy doesn't adhere, little tiny spots, which is really annoying. So bottom line here, folks, is boat building is a problem. You're going to run into problems and you're going to have to fix them. And if you're impatient like me, you kind of roll through things and then you go back and fix stuff. Maybe if you're a perfectionist, you figure it all out ahead of time. But anyway, let me show you the one of the side panels I did here. So here's a picture of the side panel. So it's got two coats of epoxy, but you see all these little white spots here. Okay, so these are all the fish eyes that I filled to make this nice and smooth. And what I used to do that with is 3M acrylic white glazing putty. It's an automotive application putty, but it works with epoxy. And I've used it before. My friend Marty Loken told me about this. So rather than, hang on just a second here. So rather than mixing up epoxy and putting micro fibers in it and having to use epoxy that only has a short working period for all these small spots, I use this glazing compound, which sands really easy. It's pretty hard. It dries pretty quickly. So there's a cheater for you there. Okay, so I got the two sides ready to go. And next thing I'll discuss here is When you varnish Okoume plywood, I've rarely done it. I've done it a little bit. It's a little bit bland looking, and I've always thought about staining it and wondering, can you stain it? If you stain it, can you put epoxy on top of it? Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Chesapeake Lightcraft, on their website, they sell stain that you can use underneath epoxy. It's a special stain that, of course, it's very expensive, special, because it is special. It's an alcohol-based stain, so you apply the stain, and when you get done, all the alcohol is released, and all that's left is the pigment in the wood. So I started off, and my boat, the Peeler Skiff, came with some mahogany pieces pre-cut, like breast hook, gunnels, things like that, and they're mahogany. So I thought, well, I'll get a light red mahogany stain. So I ordered this first, and this is, it's expensive, but you know, shipping is ridiculous. So anyway, I bought this big quart, and I got it, and it came out really red, and the mahogany that came with the boat is not this red. So I didn't want to use that. It's like, no, I'm not going to, I was tempted to use it because I paid for it, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's not going to look right with my varnished mahogany that came with the boat. So next I ordered a small bottle of brown maple with shipping $40 for a pint. So it's like $100 an ounce. No, not quite that much. Anyway, so I got this, and this came out this color, which does match kind of the tone of the mahogany that I'll be using. So here you can see this is a plain Okoume, and this is a stained Okoume. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here, folks. Sorry about that. Anyway, so here's the stain. So what I wanted to do when I was going to build this boat is like, well, I want to do something different on this boat. I'm going to stain the transom inside and out, and I'm going to stain the gunnels, and I'm going to stain the center console. Actually, let me back up. I'm going to stain the center console, which is Okoume, and I'm going to stain the transom, which is Okoume. The gunnels are already mahogany, so I'm not going to stain those. So I thought, okay, I'm going to experiment with the transom first. I'm going to stain the transom and see what that looks like. And if I don't like it, I'll just paint over it. But I've got the stain, I'm going to try it. So anyway, here is the transom stained. Now, what I did yesterday, or 2 days ago, is I stained the transom, and then yesterday I put glass on the transom, and I put peel ply over the top of it. So I'm going to give you the unveiling here of the transom, and we're going to see what it looks like. It looked a little blotchy before I put the fiberglass and epoxy over it. So anyway, here's my peel ply. This stuff sticks pretty hard, so once it dries, but you can see it does come off. By the way, this peel ply is once and done. You can see the epoxy actually settles on the top of it. Okay, so here is my fiberglassed transom. Now what I don't like that I see here is these lines. See this line right here? Which is where I rolled my epoxy out. I don't know why it's doing that. Actually, I do know why it's doing that. It's because when you put the epoxy on, the stain, it kind of liquefies, not liquefy, but it moves the stain around a little bit. So what I was doing was actually moving the stain around, and I got a little bump right there. So this is the inside of my transom, and it's got lines on it. I don't like it, folks. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I like the color. I think it's a pretty color, but I don't know if I can fix that. But anyway, another boat building disappointment. Oh boy, I got to think about this. I don't think I can stain over the epoxy. I don't think that would do anything. I can try sanding. That probably won't do anything either. I don't know. I might end up painting this. Maybe I didn't let the stain dry long enough. That may be the culprit right there. Bummer. Okay. Anyway, we're going to move on here. So I'm going to show you a few things here that I do when I boat build and work with epoxy. So first of all, what I like to do, I think I showed you these mixing containers here. And what I've found, if I'm mixing up more than 6 ounces of epoxy, rather than use the pumps that come with them, I like to just pour my epoxy in here. And what I'll do is I'll mark my lines. It's 2 to 1, so if I want 24 ounces of epoxy, I'll put a mark on 16, and I'll put my resin up to there, and then I'll put a mark on 24 and add my 8 ounces of hardener, and I'll mix it in this container. And I was using these and then throwing them out, but I decided, you know what, I think I can clean these up with denatured alcohol and reuse them. So that's what I did the last few times. I've used this one maybe 3 or 4 times. They cost $1.25. So what I'll do is I'll mix my epoxy in here, and then I will pour my epoxy onto this little pallet, which is just a piece of Okoume. So I'll pour a little bit on here, and then I will roll out, fill my roller up, and then I'll roll onto the boat. I prefer this method to just pouring the epoxy directly on the boat, on the Okoume. This seems to work a little better for me. The other thing I do is if I have leftover epoxy, which I try not to, I leave it in my shop to see how well it hardens. This is from yesterday, and this stuff is rock hard, so that's good. I already showed you my stain. I showed you my paddle roller. I actually started an epoxy log here because when I mix epoxy, I mix a certain amount and I'm either over or under, and it drives me crazy to have extra epoxy like this. So here I put a note that when I glass the inside of the transom, I used 15 ounces of epoxy, and I mixed 21, so I wasted 6, which is expensive. This is a foam roller cut into force and stuck onto a little piece of dowel. And I use this instead of a foam brush to tip off the epoxy once I put it on the boat. So you tip off your epoxy to smooth it out. Anyway, there you go, folks. I'm kind of bummed about my transom. I might just go with it. I don't know. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to email the guys at CLC and ask them if there's anything I can do with this to make it look better. If I could heat it up, or I don't know. I think that's what happened, is the stain moved around and it collected on those lines where I rolled my epoxy out. So anyway, folks, the other thing I was going to show you is here's the first bulkhead. It's just sitting in place. There's a couple tabs down here that hold it into the hole. And one thing I've done on this boat is this came with this type of shape where the frame is, where the bulkhead is. And if you can envision the seat, there's a seat that goes across here. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a seat that goes across here. So this is a sitting place, and you've got that bulkhead there. So what I did is I cut this little triangular section out right here so that this has a more traditional look. It looks more like a frame. And don't let that this little thing here throw you off, because that'll be covered up. But I wanted this to look more like a frame than a piece of plywood. So that's one of the little modifications I made. There's actually a doubler that goes on here, and this will be painted, so it'll actually look like a frame that's 3/4 inches it'll look like a frame of hardwood that's 3/4 inches by 2 1/4. So that's one of the changes I made there. And the other change I think I'm going to likely make is to add a stem to the boat. It doesn't have a stem. It's not necessary, but it'll give it a little more traditional look too. I'm just kind of trying to put my own print on this boat. It's amazing how they send this boat with everything pre-cut and pre-done, including the hardwood stuff. So feels a little bit like you're putting together a puzzle, but anyway, I want to put my own mark on it, and it's all good. And anyway, folks, I will keep you posted with my next video. Thanks for listening. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out.